Pennsylvania, 1995. A cold case that haunted the community for decades has finally been solved. The arrest has sent shockwaves through neighbors, colleagues, and friends of Lauren McAllister, a 28-year-old registered nurse known for her tireless dedication to patients and her unwavering kindness. On a crisp autumn evening, Lauren vanished without a trace, leaving her car abandoned on a lonely rural road, the forest nearby silent and foreboding. Investigators struggled for years, hitting dead ends, facing bureaucratic hurdles, and enduring decades of unanswered questions. But after decades in the shadows, DNA technology and relentless detective work would finally break the case wide open. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. Lauren McAllister's life was a study in quiet dedication and compassion, the kind of life that goes unnoticed until it is brutally disrupted. Born in the heart of Pennsylvania in a small, tightly knit town, she grew up surrounded by the rhythms of family life. Sunday dinners at her parents' home, laughter spilling into the backyard, and the small but steady traditions that form the backbone of a close community. From an early age, she showed an innate ability to care for others. Whether it was tending to a sick neighbor or volunteering at the local community center, Lauren had a reputation for putting others before herself. It was this generosity that would later define not just her career, but her entire presence in the town. By her late 20s, Lauren had established herself as a registered nurse at the local hospital, a position that demanded long, grueling hours. She often worked double shifts and stayed late to comfort patients who needed reassurance, taking the time to listen when others rushed by. Her colleagues admired her empathy and professional dedication, describing her as someone who seemed to draw strength from the well-being of those around her. Even when exhaustion threatened, she maintained a warm smile, a kind word, or a simple gesture that made the hospital a slightly more humane place. Beyond the hospital walls, Lauren's life was equally full. On weekends, she visited her parents, walked the town streets greeting neighbors, and became a familiar presence in the local cafes and parks. People would often comment on her laughter, a sound described as both unassuming and infectious, capable of lighting up even the dullest afternoon. It was in these ordinary interactions, sharing a cup of coffee with a friend, helping a neighbor with errands, or quietly volunteering her time, that Lauren's deep humanity was most visible. Despite her apparent stability and the warmth of her community connections, there was a sense of vulnerability beneath the surface. Like many young women living alone in a small town, Lauren was aware of risks that lurked in the shadows of everyday life. Late-night walks home from work or drives along rural roads carried the quiet tension of being watched, of encountering the unpredictable. It was a tension that she managed with grace, but it was present nonetheless. Friends recall moments when she expressed concern over safety in casual conversations, small remarks that now seem chilling in hindsight. She lived her life fully, yet with a subtle awareness of the fragility of security in a world that often overlooked it. Family described Lauren as not only deeply committed, but also remarkably balanced. She treasured her friendships and family ties, celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, and communal milestones with unwavering enthusiasm. Holidays were never solitary for Lauren. She made it a point to include those around her, from colleagues to neighbors who had no family nearby. Meals in her family home often became larger gatherings, extending beyond the immediate family to friends and neighbors alike, turning simple dinners into shared celebrations of life, laughter, and connection. Her social circle was broad and deep, and her absence would later be felt in ways that statistics or reports could never capture. The empty chair at a kitchen table, the silence in a corridor where her presence had once been comforting. Lauren's professional life and her personal life intertwined seamlessly. The compassion she showed at work extended into her community engagement. She volunteered at local health drives, helped organize fundraisers for medical causes, and mentored young women entering nursing programs. Her actions were motivated by more than duty. They reflected a genuine desire to leave a positive imprint on the lives of those she touched. In every sense, Lauren embodied the ideals of service, empathy, and dedication. Her promise was evident not just in her professional trajectory, but in the countless small acts that made the community see her as a figure of kindness and reliability. And yet, for all her brightness and stability, the world around her was not without danger. As Lauren navigated her daily routines, navigating hospital shifts, evening walks, and weekend gatherings, an unseen threat crept closer. It was not in the form of an ominous stranger lurking openly, but in the subtle, almost imperceptible presence of someone tracking her movements, someone whose intentions would go unnoticed until the moment of irreversible action. The ordinary rhythms of her life, the predictable, comforting cycles of work, social engagements, and family time, masked the looming catastrophe that would shatter everything. On the evening that would mark the end of her ordinary life, Lauren left her hospital shift with her usual optimism. She planned to stop at her parents' home, share a meal, and maybe take a short walk in the crisp Pennsylvania air. She was never seen alive again. Her absence sent immediate ripples through the community. Concern, confusion, and disbelief mixed in equal measure. Those who knew her could not reconcile the image of Lauren, so vibrant, so present, disappearing into the void without a trace. The town, usually steeped in routine and small-town predictability, felt an immediate chill, a sense that the familiar had been violated. Lauren McAllister's life was ordinary in its routines, but extraordinary in its impact. Her presence, her compassion, and her commitment to others made her indispensable to the fabric of the community. And yet that very ordinariness became the canvas for tragedy. How could someone so beloved vanish without a trace, leaving behind only fear, grief, and a cascade of unanswered questions? The answer would not come quickly, and the shadow of uncertainty would linger over Pennsylvania for decades to come, waiting for the moment when science, perseverance, and justice would finally intersect. The morning had begun like any other for Lauren McAllister, a routine familiar to everyone in her small Pennsylvania town. She arrived at the local hospital early, her white coat crisp, her stethoscope in place, and her mind focused on the day ahead. For Lauren, nursing was more than a job, it was a calling. That day, she moved from room to room, checking on patients, monitoring vital signs, and offering words of reassurance. One patient, an elderly man recovering from surgery, struggled with fear and confusion. Lauren spent extra minutes by his bedside, holding his hand, calming his nerves, and explaining each step of his treatment with patience and clarity. These small acts, invisible to some, defined her presence, an unwavering dedication that left colleagues both impressed and comforted. By mid-morning, Lauren had wrapped up her rounds and stepped into the hospital corridors, offering smiles to fellow nurses and greeting the cleaning staff she had known for years. She paused briefly to check on a colleague struggling with a heavy workload, offering help that extended beyond professional obligation. To those around her, Lauren's energy and care seemed inexhaustible. Even after long hours, she never wavered in her empathy, her focus on others, or her gentle demeanor. Her colleagues later described the morning as ordinary, unaware that it would become the last time they saw her alive in a routine hospital setting. As the day progressed, Lauren made plans to stop by her parents' home for dinner. She called ahead, reminding them to keep a plate warm and promising to arrive before evening. On her drive home, the streets of Pennsylvania felt unusually quiet, the late afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across familiar neighborhoods. Neighbors later recalled seeing her car, a modest sedan she had driven for years, gliding past, windows rolled up, headlights cutting through the afternoon haze. At the time, no one noticed anything unusual. There was nothing to suggest that the day, which began with laughter, coffee, and casual conversation, was about to descend into terror. Later that evening, the first signs of something amiss emerged. Lauren's car was discovered abandoned on a remote winding road outside the town, a place rarely traveled after dark. The vehicle's doors were locked, the keys nowhere in sight, yet her purse remained inside untouched. It was a detail that would later puzzle investigators. Nothing had been stolen. No signs of struggle marred the interior, and yet the vehicle was left as though the occupant had vanished into thin air. The evidence suggested a sudden, deliberate disruption of her life, a moment of violence or coercion that had left no immediate witnesses, no immediate answers. Residents who lived near the area reported seeing strange activity. Headlights appeared in the distance, then vanished into the trees, and shadows flitted at the edges of the surrounding woods. One neighbor thought they saw a figure moving quickly near the tree line, but in a town accustomed to the quiet of rural evenings, such observations were easy to dismiss at first. Only later did they take on ominous significance. The combination of the abandoned car, the untouched belongings, and the fleeting glimpses of movement painted a chilling scene. Lauren had disappeared under circumstances that defied simple explanation. By nightfall, panic began to grip her family. Calls to her cell phone went unanswered, and text messages remained without reply. A sense of dread settled over her parents' home as minutes stretched into hours. They retraced her usual routes in their minds, trying to imagine every possible scenario, each more terrifying than the last. Friends, initially assuming she was caught up in overtime or traffic delays, soon began to worry when Lauren failed to check in. The small community, once secure in the familiarity of their routines, began to realize that something sinister had occurred. The disappearance of a young woman known for her kindness, reliability, and visibility in everyday life left the town shaken to its core. Law enforcement was called in to investigate, and the initial hours proved critical. Police examined the car and the surrounding area, searching for evidence of struggle, clues, or witnesses. Footprints, tire marks, or personal items might have provided insight, but the scene offered almost nothing definitive. The uncertainty fueled anxiety, as every passing hour without answers deepened the community's fear. The question on everyone's mind was simple yet haunting. Who could want to harm someone so universally loved, someone whose life was intertwined with so many others in meaningful ways? As darkness fell, the fear of the unknown became almost tangible. The neighbors who had glimpsed shadows and disappearing headlights began to connect dots that were impossible to confirm. The forested roads, once peaceful and familiar, now appeared threatening and unwelcoming. Lauren's absence was no longer just a concern. It was a crisis. The sense of security in the town, in the community, and even in the simplest aspects of daily life had been shattered. Her disappearance became a subject of whispered speculation, of growing unease, and of relentless worry. Even as the night wore on, her family clung to hope, unable to accept that the young nurse they adored could be in harm's way. Friends and colleagues feared the worst but continued to hold on to the possibility that Lauren might be found alive. Meanwhile, law enforcement began canvassing the area, following leads and questioning those who might have seen her that evening. But every inquiry only revealed more uncertainty, leaving the question unresolved. Had Lauren encountered a stranger, or had someone she knew taken deliberate action? Could a life so devoted to others truly have been cut short in an instant, leaving a town struggling to comprehend the unimaginable? The day that began with ordinary routines, rounds at the hospital, visits with friends and family, small acts of care and kindness, ended in fear, confusion, and unanswered questions. Lauren McAllister's disappearance marked a turning point for the community, the moment ordinary life collided with unimaginable tragedy. Her absence would ignite an investigation, spark years of grief, and ultimately set the stage for the long journey toward justice. The central question remained echoing in every mind that evening. Would Lauren ever be found alive? Or had the peaceful streets of Pennsylvania become the backdrop for a story that would haunt them for decades to come? The initial days after Lauren McAllister's disappearance were filled with mounting anxiety, unanswered calls, and restless searches. Friends and family combed the streets she was known to walk, retraced her usual routes, and distributed flyers hoping for a glimpse or lead. The town's residents, initially clinging to hope that she had merely been delayed or lost, began to feel the weight of grim reality. But nothing prepared them for the moment when their worst fears were confirmed. It was a passerby, someone on a morning walk, who stumbled across a glimpse of what would shatter the fragile calm of the town. Lauren's body, partially hidden beneath dense undergrowth on the outskirts of town, where trees formed a natural boundary between the suburban roads and the unwelcoming forest beyond. The scene was instantly haunting. Morning light struggled to penetrate the canopy, casting long shadows across the earth. The underbrush, thick with leaves and the debris of seasons, seemed almost to swallow the figure lying within it. There was a suffocating silence, broken only by the distant call of birds and the passerby's hurried footsteps as they summoned authorities. The forest, so ordinary in daylight, now seemed ominous, a silent witness to a violent act that had taken place beyond the public eye. Police arrived quickly, securing the perimeter and cordoning off the area with bright yellow tape. Investigators moved carefully, fully aware of the delicate nature of the evidence and the environmental challenges presented by the forested site. Fallen leaves, rain-soaked soil, and broken branches complicated efforts to reconstruct the events leading to Lauren's death. Every footstep was calculated, every movement cautious. Photographers captured the scene from multiple angles. Forensic teams collected soil samples, and officers combed through the immediate surroundings for any trace of the perpetrator. Yet the location itself presented immediate difficulties. Animal tracks, shifting soil, and weather had already disturbed much of the potential evidence. The investigators were working against time, nature, and the elusive certainty of truth. When the autopsy results returned, the community's collective fear solidified into anger and despair. Lauren's injuries were inconsistent with an accident, indicating clear signs of foul play. The precision, force, and pattern of the trauma pointed to intentional harm, not a misstep or a fall. The medical examiner's report, read carefully by detectives and later summarized for family members, confirmed what many had dreaded but refused to fully accept. Lauren McAllister had been taken from them, not by circumstance but by deliberate action. Her life had been interrupted violently, abruptly, and with no apparent regard for the person she was. The implications rippled through the town, transforming fear into a quiet, pervasive grief that lingered in hallways, kitchens, and hospital corridors alike. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues were devastated. Those who had interacted with Lauren in the days leading up to her disappearance replayed conversations and encounters in search of something they might have missed. A warning, a clue, a fleeting expression that could now be interpreted as premonition. Her laughter, her empathy, her everyday acts of kindness, moments previously considered ordinary, took on a profound poignancy, reminders of what had been lost. Family members experienced a mixture of numbness and shock, an overwhelming grief intensified by the manner of her death. The forest had stolen not just Lauren, but a sense of security and trust from the entire community. For law enforcement, the discovery presented immediate and formidable challenges. There were very few witnesses. The passerby who found her had arrived too late to observe any suspicious activity. The crime scene, while now secured, had already been subject to natural disturbance. Rain, wind, and wildlife had moved evidence, obscuring potential leads. The tools available in 1995 were limited. DNA testing existed but was not yet the robust resource it would become decades later. Fingerprints were scarce, and the physical evidence left behind offered little more than vague impressions of the events that had transpired. Investigators faced a scenario all too familiar in cold cases. A victim found, a town in mourning, and a trail that led to frustrating dead ends. Despite the grimness, detectives persisted, relying on traditional investigative methods. They interviewed friends, neighbors, and co-workers, attempting to reconstruct Lauren's last movements in the hours before her disappearance. They traced phone calls, examined her social and professional contacts, and scrutinized recent interactions for anomalies. Each lead, however, seemed to dissolve under the weight of uncertainty. Suspects were questioned but released for lack of evidence. The silence of witnesses, combined with the absence of tangible clues, created a cloud of ambiguity over the investigation. The question became increasingly pressing. Who could commit such a calculated act against someone so universally trusted, so universally loved? The community's reaction mirrored the complexity of the investigation. Vigilance turned to fear. Homes felt less safe, streets more menacing. People who had walked the same roads as Lauren now hesitated, recalling small details they had previously ignored. An unusual car parked nearby, shadows that had passed unnoticed, footsteps that had seemed like coincidence. Each memory, each anecdote added to the growing anxiety that enveloped the town. Conversations shifted, families discussed precautions, and the knowledge that a violent crime had occurred in their midst altered the rhythm of everyday life. Even as police combed through the evidence, the most important question remained unanswered. Why Lauren? What motivated the person who took her life so violently, and what had they intended when they committed the act? Investigators were forced to confront the stark reality that the answers might not be immediate. For the town, for her family, and for those who had loved her, closure seemed distant, a fragile hope hanging over the shadowed streets and forest edges where her body had been found. The haunting question persisted. Could justice ever be served for Lauren McAllister, or would her death remain a tragic mystery, one of Pennsylvania's many cold cases that refused to yield its secrets? The initial days following the discovery of Lauren McAllister's body were filled with a frenetic energy that quickly gave way to frustration. Law enforcement mobilized immediately, setting up command posts near the site where she had been found, and deploying teams to canvass the surrounding areas. Officers spoke with neighbors, colleagues, and anyone who might have seen something out of place in the hours leading up to her disappearance. Every detail, no matter how trivial it seemed at the time, was logged and scrutinized. Notes were taken, timelines were constructed, and photographs of the surrounding area were analyzed repeatedly. For investigators, the hope was that a small detail could unlock the larger mystery. A fleeting glimpse, a discarded item, a witness statement that had been overlooked. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation began to reveal both leads and frustrations. Tips came in from across the community, some credible, others clearly misguided or fabricated. A local resident recalled seeing a suspicious vehicle near the area where Lauren's car had been abandoned, only to later admit the memory may have been mistaken. Another tip suggested a person known to the town who had acted strangely in the days preceding her disappearance, but upon questioning, no evidence linked the individual to the crime. Each lead brought a flicker of hope followed by disappointment, and with every dead end, the emotional toll on investigators and the community intensified. Police also began to reconstruct Lauren's last known movements. They examined hospital records, spoke with co-workers, and attempted to track her interactions on the day of her disappearance. Every call she had made, every appointment she had kept, and every person she had encountered was examined for potential relevance. The painstaking process highlighted the complexity of modern investigative work in a small-town setting, where information could be fragmented, memories unreliable, and schedules overlapping. Despite the effort, the investigation frequently hit roadblocks that made progress feel painfully slow. Amid the search for concrete evidence, rumors began to spread throughout the community. Conversations at local cafes, workplaces, and schools reflected the growing anxiety and suspicion. Some speculated that someone from outside the town had committed the crime, while others suggested it was someone who knew Lauren personally. The lack of immediate answers intensified fear, making neighbors more vigilant and heightening the sense of unease in streets and homes that had once felt secure. Friends of Lauren described sleepless nights, worry-filled days, and the emotional strain of living under the shadow of uncertainty. Even casual outings became tense, punctuated by thoughts of what could have happened to their friend and whether anyone in the community could be trusted. Internally, law enforcement faced challenges of its own. Communication between departments sometimes faltered, and investigative missteps, small errors in documentation or delayed evidence processing, slowed the pace of discovery. While seasoned officers remained diligent, bureaucratic procedures and the pressure to produce results created friction and occasional misdirection. The complexity of the case, combined with the emotional weight of public expectation, meant that investigators were working under intense scrutiny. Every action was measured and remeasured, yet even the most careful steps sometimes led to dead ends. Suspects were questioned, some multiple times, but no charges were filed in the early stages of the investigation. Authorities struggled to find concrete links between potential perpetrators and the crime. The evidence available was circumstantial at best, and the physical traces at the scene had been compromised by time, weather, and human interference. Detectives had to balance the need for speed with the necessity of caution. Rushing to judgment could allow the real perpetrator to remain free, while waiting too long risked losing critical memories or fading evidence. As frustration mounted, the community's patience was tested. Town meetings were tense, with residents demanding answers and reassurance. Police officers and detectives were caught between the emotional weight of the case and the limitations of the investigative tools available to them. Each day that passed without progress seemed to deepen the sense of hopelessness. The case, which had initially sparked urgent action, now appeared to slip further into darkness as investigators struggled to maintain momentum and morale. Despite the setbacks, the team refused to abandon the search for answers. They continued revisiting leads, re-interviewing witnesses, and reviewing evidence for overlooked clues. The investigation became a balancing act between patience and urgency, hope and reality. Each new piece of information, no matter how small, was analyzed for its potential to crack the case wide open. Friends and family of Lauren remained vigilant, pushing investigators to keep pursuing every possible avenue, refusing to let the case fade into the background of daily life. Yet even as tireless efforts continued, a critical question lingered over every conversation, every piece of evidence, and every night spent reviewing reports. Could the true perpetrator still be hiding in plain sight, blending into the same community that had mourned Lauren for weeks? Or had the trail gone completely cold, leaving only uncertainty, grief, and unanswered questions in the wake of a crime that seemed to defy resolution? This lingering doubt, unspoken yet palpable, created a shadow that would extend over Pennsylvania in the months and years to follow, setting the stage for a painstaking search for justice that would test the limits of law enforcement, technology, and the resilience of a grieving community. As the years stretched on, the initial frenzy surrounding Lauren McAllister's disappearance gradually subsided, replaced by the heavy weight of uncertainty and grief. In the months following her death, the town had been gripped by fear, suspicion, and sorrow. But as time passed, daily life inevitably returned to a semblance of normalcy. Yet for Lauren's family, colleagues, and friends, normalcy was impossible to reclaim. Every corner of the small Pennsylvania community seemed to echo with reminders of her absence. The empty chair at a neighborhood cafe, the unclaimed tasks at the hospital where she had worked, the quiet hush that fell over family dinners without her presence. Grief became a constant companion, threading through the ordinary routines of life. Leads that had once sparked hope, suspicious individuals, potential eyewitness reports, and physical clues faded into memory. Tips from neighbors and distant contacts dried up, and evidence that had seemed promising initially turned out to be inconclusive. The case began to slip through the cracks of public consciousness, becoming a story whispered in hushed tones rather than actively discussed. For local law enforcement, pressure eased but not relief. The files were archived, the reports stored away in dusty cabinets, and the case became officially labeled as unresolved. To the outside world, it appeared as though Lauren's disappearance had been swallowed by time. Yet her family never accepted this quiet defeat. Lauren's parents, in particular, remained steadfast, refusing to allow their daughter's story to fade into obscurity. They spent countless hours revisiting police reports, tracking the movements of potential leads, and maintaining contact with investigators who were still willing to review the cold case. Birthdays and anniversaries became bittersweet milestones, each one a stark reminder of what had been lost. Family holidays were punctuated by absence, and even small, quiet moments, such as walking past a place Lauren had loved or hearing her favorite song on the radio, became emotional touchstones. The passage of time did little to soften the pain. If anything, it intensified the longing for answers and the desire for justice. Detectives who had worked the case initially found themselves returning to the files, combing through notes and evidence with the benefit of hindsight. They reread statements, analyzed timelines, and reconsidered every minor clue. In hindsight, small inconsistencies in witness accounts, slight anomalies in reported sightings, and overlooked items at the crime scene took on new significance. Every minor detail became a potential key to unlocking the mystery that had resisted resolution for years. While official resources for active investigation were limited, the determination of a few dedicated detectives kept the case alive, quietly simmering in the background of law enforcement offices and evidence rooms across the state. Meanwhile, the community itself had adapted to life without answers, but not without lingering unease. Conversations in schools, workplaces, and local businesses occasionally circled back to Lauren, often with speculation, regret, or a sense of unfinished business. The story of her disappearance became a cautionary tale, a shadow over familiar streets and a ghostly presence in places once considered safe. Parents would remind children to be careful on quiet roads. Friends would note how brief encounters could have long-lasting consequences, and neighbors would recount how someone as vibrant as Lauren could simply vanish, leaving an entire community in stunned disbelief. Despite the apparent dormancy of the case, the emotional toll on Lauren's family was immeasurable. Each passing year brought new reminders of what could have been, a promotion she might have received, vacations she could have taken, milestones she should have shared. The constant ache of absence combined with the uncertainty surrounding the circumstances of her death created a psychological burden that never eased. Every unanswered question was a fresh wound, and every small memory was a reminder of the vibrancy and warmth that had been lost to the shadow of a violent act. Within law enforcement circles, the case became a study in the challenges of unresolved homicide investigations. It demonstrated how even well-staffed, well-funded departments could find themselves thwarted by limited evidence, unreliable witnesses, and the passage of time. The case also highlighted the human elements that complicated investigations, miscommunications between units, the fading memories of key witnesses, and the subtle missteps in early investigative procedures that, while understandable in context, left gaps that could never be fully repaired. For the detectives still attached to the case, the struggle was both professional and personal. They were seeking justice for a life lost, while battling the encroaching frustration of a trail that had seemingly gone cold. Yet even as months became years, hope remained. Periodically, new forensic technologies emerged, offering the possibility of re-examining old evidence. Investigators considered advances in DNA testing, fingerprint analysis, and digital record-keeping, understanding that what had been inconclusive in 1995 might be resolvable in a later decade. These small glimmers of possibility kept the case alive in ways that official closure could not. Family and detectives alike clung to the notion that time, while often a thief, could also be a revealer that the answers might still exist, waiting to be uncovered by someone persistent enough to find them. But the overarching question remained, casting a shadow over every year, every effort, and every quiet night. Could the passage of time finally allow clarity? Or would Lauren's disappearance remain one of Pennsylvania's enduring mysteries, locked away in the past, untouchable and unresolved? For her family, friends, and the community that had once embraced her as one of their own, the question persisted relentlessly, a haunting reminder of what had been lost and what had yet to be found. The case had gone cold, but the search for answers, for justice, and for a measure of peace continued, quietly simmering in the hearts of those who refused to forget Lauren McAllister. After years of stagnation, the Lauren McAllister case, long considered a cold file in Pennsylvania, began to stir once more, not through human intuition alone, but through the advancements of forensic science. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, DNA technology had advanced far beyond what was available in 1995. Techniques that could extract profiles from minute traces of biological material, process degraded samples, and cross-reference them with vast statewide databases offered renewed hope to families who had lived decades in uncertainty. For investigators, this represented a new era, one in which cases previously resigned to the shadows could be re-examined with unprecedented precision. The preserved evidence from the original investigation became the focal point of this scientific resurgence. Items once cataloged and stored in the police evidence locker, the fibers from Lauren's clothing, swabs from the abandoned car, and other biological traces collected at the scene, were now ready to be reanalyzed. Every sample was subjected to advanced techniques, mitochondrial DNA sequencing, STR analysis, and comparisons with statewide and national databases. Even photographs and crime scene documentation were revisited with enhanced digital imaging, revealing details invisible to the human eye 2 decades prior. Each re-examination offered the potential to yield what had eluded investigators in 1995, a verifiable link to the perpetrator. Meanwhile, detectives involved in the cold case assembled a team of both experienced officers and forensic specialists. They meticulously reviewed the archived notes, cross-referenced timelines, and considered old leads with a fresh perspective. What had seemed inconclusive years earlier was now interpreted in a new light. The team approached the case with cautious optimism, aware that decades had dulled memories and that the criminal might still be active, or worse, blending into the fabric of the community unnoticed. Yet for the first time in years, there was a palpable sense of momentum, a feeling that the case could move from unresolved tragedy toward resolution. A breakthrough came unexpectedly. A witness who had remained silent for over 20 years came forward with information that could not be ignored. Initially hesitant, the individual finally provided details about suspicious activity near the area of Lauren's disappearance, coupled with an observation about a person who had been present around the time of the crime. This tip, corroborated by old case notes, directed investigators to re-examine a particular set of DNA samples that had previously returned no usable profile. The convergence of new scientific methods with this long-suppressed testimony suddenly transformed a cold lead into something concrete, a thread that could unravel the mystery that had haunted the community for decades. As forensic analysts worked through the evidence, The tension in the investigative team was almost tangible. Every result, every match was scrutinized multiple times. Contamination, mislabeling, or procedural error could render months of painstaking work meaningless. The team moved carefully, aware that public attention was intensifying. Residents who had long accepted that Lauren's disappearance might never be solved were now whispering about renewed hope. And the local media began reporting cautiously on the developments, careful not to jump to conclusions but recognizing the potential significance of the breakthrough. Across the community, families, friends, and colleagues followed each update with a mix of excitement and apprehension.
Many who had mourned Lauren's loss had grown accustomed to living with ambiguity and grief.
The prospect that her killer might finally be identified rekindled emotions long buried: relief, fear, anticipation, and a cautious hope for justice. Conversations in cafes, workplaces, and homes reflected the delicate balance of optimism and anxiety. People speculated about who could be linked to the crime, how evidence had survived decades, and whether the law could finally achieve what time had so far prevented. Investigators were now able to link DNA traces from Lauren's clothing and the surrounding area to a profile in the state database. The match was statistically significant, giving the team confidence that they were on the verge of identifying the perpetrator. Every layer of evidence, physical, testimonial, and digital, was cross-referenced meticulously, with specialists working in tandem to confirm results. For the first time in nearly 20 years, the cold case was producing tangible progress, offering the potential for closure to a grieving family and justice for a woman whose life had been brutally cut short. Even with this breakthrough, uncertainty persisted. Investigators recognized that DNA alone could not tell the full story. Motive, opportunity, and corroborating evidence would still need to be established to secure a conviction. Each potential lead demanded careful attention, balancing speed with the need for precision. Investigators prepared for interviews, interrogations, and the inevitable scrutiny from both the public and the legal system. The weight of responsibility was immense. Decades of grief, community interest, and the need to honor Lauren's memory hung over every decision. The suspense extended beyond the police department. The small Pennsylvania community, long haunted by Lauren's disappearance, now felt the stirrings of change. Hopes were rising that this scientific breakthrough would finally unearth the truth, yet caution tempered excitement. People had lived with false leads, rumors, and unresolved grief for so long that even tangible progress was met with disbelief. Would this new evidence be enough to bring the perpetrator to justice? Could science close a chapter that human memory had long left unresolved? As the analysis progressed, investigators braced themselves for the consequences of their findings. They knew that any forthcoming identification could shake the town to its core, revealing truth that some might have hoped remained hidden. Every test, every match brought them closer to the moment when decades of waiting could transform into accountability. It was a tense, electrifying period, one where the promise of justice hung delicately in the balance, and so, as the DNA results continued to solidify, the question loomed larger than ever. Would this breakthrough finally identify the true perpetrator? Could science, patient, meticulous, and relentless, close the chapter on a tragedy that had haunted Pennsylvania for years? The anticipation was nearly unbearable, and the next steps would determine whether Lauren McAllister's family and community could finally move from mourning and uncertainty toward justice and closure. Decades after Lauren McAllister vanished, the Pennsylvania community was jolted awake by news that had once seemed impossible. A suspect had been arrested in connection with her murder. The announcement came after months of careful preparation, driven by the breakthrough in DNA evidence that had reignited the investigation. Detectives had painstakingly pieced together a timeline, corroborated witness statements, and matched forensic findings, culminating in a single individual whose past connections to the area and proximity to Lauren placed him squarely at the center of the long, cold case. The arrest was swift and precise, conducted in a way designed to preserve both the safety of officers and the integrity of the evidence. Local news outlets immediately broadcast the arrest, showing footage of uniformed officers escorting the suspect in handcuffs from a modest home to a waiting vehicle. The images spread rapidly across Pennsylvania and beyond, capturing the intensity of the moment, the silent tension of officers, the watchful eyes of neighbors, and the looming presence of a crime that had left a permanent scar on the community. Social media and news feeds were flooded with reactions, ranging from relief that progress had finally been made to shock and disbelief that the person responsible had lived in plain sight for so many years. For Lauren's family, the arrest elicited a complex mixture of emotions. Relief was immediate. After decades of uncertainty, there was now someone to hold accountable, yet the grief that had never fully subsided remained, now intertwined with a cautious hope that justice might finally be served. Her parents, siblings, and closest friends reflected on the long years of sleepless nights, unanswered questions, and the emotional toll of living with an unresolved tragedy. The arrest did not erase the pain, but it marked a moment when that pain could begin to converge with validation and a path toward closure. Community members also felt a profound impact. Those who had lived with the anxiety and fear that followed Lauren's disappearance found themselves confronting a reality that had once seemed distant. The arrest challenged assumptions about safety, familiarity, and trust within the town. Many were forced to reconcile the idea that someone who had appeared ordinary, someone whose presence had been woven into the everyday life of Pennsylvania, could have committed an act so heinous. The juxtaposition of ordinariness and criminality intensified the emotional resonance, turning familiar streets, homes, and workplaces into reminders of the hidden darkness that had long gone unnoticed. Law enforcement maintained a careful, deliberate approach. The suspect's rights were fully respected, and investigators ensured that the arrest was conducted in strict accordance with legal protocols. Officers were aware that public attention was intense, and any misstep could compromise the case. For decades, the team had worked behind the scenes, navigating dead ends, false leads, and procedural challenges. Now the culmination of those efforts was on public display, a testament to persistence, meticulous investigation, and the evolving capabilities of forensic science. Despite the immediate triumph of the arrest, uncertainty remained. The suspect offered little information, remaining silent in the presence of law enforcement and legal authorities. His demeanor was calm, inscrutable, and unyielding, providing no insight into motive or intent. This silence heightened the tension, leaving the community, investigators, and Lauren's family to grapple with questions that would soon demand answers in a courtroom. The arrest was merely the opening act of a legal drama that promised to reveal further complexities, hidden truths, and the difficult process of translating forensic evidence into a legal verdict. The media coverage amplified the emotional stakes. News reports emphasized both the breakthrough in forensic science and the long journey of persistence by detectives and family members. Interviews with neighbors, friends, and colleagues highlighted the sense of shock that someone connected to the community could be implicated in a crime that had haunted them for decades. Commentators discussed the implications of modern investigative techniques, while legal analysts speculated on potential challenges in securing a conviction. Every narrative reinforced the high stakes of the unfolding trial, intensifying public interest and underscoring the broader significance of justice being pursued after so many years. Investigators continued to prepare for the trial even as the arrest reverberated across Pennsylvania. They meticulously documented the chain of evidence, reviewed witness statements, and coordinated with prosecutors to ensure that every aspect of the case was airtight. Each detail mattered. The DNA match, corroborating witness accounts, timelines, and ancillary evidence would all be scrutinized in court. Detectives were acutely aware that the strength of the prosecution rested not only on the evidence, but on the ability to withstand the inevitable legal challenges and defense strategies. The stakes were enormous, not just for the accused, but for the memory of Lauren McAllister, her family, and the community that had waited decades for justice. For Lauren's loved ones, the arrest represented a turning point in an emotional journey that had spanned years of uncertainty. The possibility of accountability was now real, yet tempered by the knowledge that a legal process would follow, one that could be lengthy, grueling, and emotionally taxing. They were prepared to relive details, endure cross-examinations, and witness the complex interplay of law and justice. The emotional burden, long carried silently, would now be shared with the public as the trial unfolded, putting their grief, determination, and hope under the scrutiny of a community that had shared in their loss. As the town of Pennsylvania grappled with the reality of the arrest, one pressing question loomed over every conversation, every news broadcast, and every internal discussion among investigators. Was justice truly within reach? Or would the trial uncover further complexities and hidden truths? The arrest offered a glimpse of resolution, but it also highlighted the challenges that remained: legal, emotional, and procedural. For decades, Lauren McAllister's story had been defined by uncertainty, and now, with a suspect in custody, the next chapter promised both revelation and confrontation. The anticipation was palpable. In homes, workplaces, and hospitals, residents discussed the implications of the arrest, wondering whether the quiet, ordinary figure now charged with the crime could provide answers to the questions that had lingered for so long. Could a courtroom finally unravel the web of events that had left a community traumatized? Would decades of grief and speculation be transformed into clarity, accountability, and justice? The arrest had delivered a moment of validation, but the deeper journey, the trial, the testimonies, and the verdict, was just beginning. The suspense, carefully nurtured over decades, now entered its most public high-stakes phase, and Pennsylvania watched with bated breath. When courtroom doors opened for the trial of the man accused of taking Lauren McAllister's life, the weight of decades of grief, speculation, and hope pressed heavily on every participant. From the outset, it was clear that this was no ordinary case. The courtroom itself seemed charged with the energy of a small Pennsylvania community that had waited nearly 20 years for justice. Media cameras filled the gallery, documenting proceedings, while friends, family, and neighbors filled the benches, each carrying their own memories, pain, and anticipation. The trial represented a culmination of years of work, sacrifice, and emotional endurance, and everyone present felt the gravity of what was at stake. Prosecutors opened with a detailed account of Lauren's life, portraying her as a devoted nurse, a beloved daughter, and a fixture in her community whose compassion had touched countless lives. They recounted her daily routines, her dedication to patients, her interactions with family and friends, and the events of the day that had ultimately led to her disappearance. The narrative was intentionally humanizing, a reminder to the jury that beyond the forensic data and procedural details lay a life cut tragically short. Then, they shifted to the forensic evidence, recounting the painstaking investigative work that led to the suspect's identification decades later. DNA analysis, once impossible, had now provided a reliable link, corroborated by witness testimony and other investigative findings. Every element was presented carefully, aiming to construct a clear chain from crime to accountability. Defense attorneys countered with rigorous scrutiny. They questioned timelines, emphasizing the passage of time and the potential for memory degradation in witnesses who recalled events from decades earlier. They challenged the interpretation of forensic evidence, pointing to possible contamination, errors in early collection, or misidentification. Their strategy aimed to introduce doubt, reminding the jury that in criminal trials certainty must meet the highest legal standard. Cross-examinations were intense. Every witness was tested, every recollection weighed, and every procedural step analyzed. The tension in the room was palpable, with attorneys for both sides aware that the stakes extended far beyond the individuals present. They were confronting decades of community trauma and emotional investment. Witness testimony became a central element of the trial. Friends and colleagues of Lauren recounted ordinary interactions now tinged with tragic foresight. A coffee shared during a morning shift, a smile exchanged in passing, a patient reassured in distress. Their recollections, while seemingly mundane, underscored the humanity of the victim, reminding the jury that the person on trial had destroyed a vibrant, beloved life. Neighbors and longtime community members contributed statements about the evening of her disappearance, providing context to the location, traffic patterns, and observations of activity near the scene. Each account, however small, was examined for consistency, reliability, and relevance, forming a mosaic that prosecutors hoped would convey the truth clearly. Forensic experts then presented the critical scientific findings that had reignited the case after decades. DNA analysts described the meticulous testing process, explaining how samples preserved for years had yielded definitive matches using modern methods unavailable in 1995. They walked the jury through the methodology, addressing potential challenges and reinforcing the credibility of their conclusions. Other experts explained the condition of the crime scene, how environmental factors had impacted evidence, and the significance of even minute traces that linked the suspect to Lauren. The courtroom became a space where science and narrative intersected, and the weight of decades of investigation was made tangible through facts, charts, and professional testimony. The defense worked to humanize the accused, emphasizing his ordinary presence in the community, his unremarkable daily routines, and the passage of time since the crime. They questioned whether a conviction could rely on evidence separated from the incident by years, highlighting gaps in the original investigation and raising concerns about confirmation bias. The legal battle became a careful balancing act, presenting the meticulous work of investigators and forensic experts while challenging the jury to consider alternate interpretations of the evidence. Each objection, each clarification, and each motion punctuated the trial with tension, keeping both participants and observers on edge. Throughout the proceedings, the emotional impact on Lauren's family remained visible. They followed each testimony, held hands for comfort, and sometimes struggled to maintain composure. Every word spoken in the courtroom, whether by an expert explaining DNA matches or a friend recounting a personal memory, resonated deeply. For them, this was more than a legal process. It was the reckoning of a life lost, a decades-long search for validation and a confrontation with both grief and hope. The jury was equally attentive, tasked with untangling a complex web of evidence, emotion, and time to arrive at a verdict that could honor the victim's memory and uphold the integrity of justice. The trial was not only a test of legal skill but also a reflection of the broader implications of cold case investigations. It highlighted how advancements in technology, persistence of investigators, and the courage of long silent witnesses could converge to confront a crime that once seemed unsolvable. It underscored the challenges of balancing evidence with human memory, science with narrative, and law with emotion. Each day of testimony, cross-examination, and deliberation brought the community closer to a resolution they had long awaited. Yet the final outcome remained uncertain. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, the tension became nearly unbearable. Every witness had testified, every piece of forensic evidence presented, and every argument laid out before the jury. Observers, both in the courtroom and beyond, felt the weight of decades of unanswered questions pressing against the walls of the Pennsylvania courthouse. The central question remained unresolved. Would the trial honor Lauren McAllister's memory and deliver justice, or would the complexities of law, procedure, and time obscure the truth that had been painstakingly uncovered? The courtroom, heavy with anticipation, seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the community waited, reflecting on the years of fear, loss, and uncertainty, and hoping that the painstaking efforts of investigators, prosecutors, and forensic specialists would finally produce clarity. The stakes were immense. The verdict would not only determine the fate of the accused, but would also define whether decades of grief could finally converge with accountability, whether the memory of Lauren McAllister could be respected through the impartial execution of justice, and whether a community long haunted by tragedy could at last begin the process of healing. The conclusion of Lauren McAllister's trial marked a turning point, but it was only the beginning of her story's broader impact. Though justice had been served in a courtroom, her life and the circumstances surrounding her death resonated far beyond legal verdicts. Her family, determined to ensure that Lauren's legacy extended beyond grief, channeled their pain into action. Foundations were established in her name, focusing on issues she had been passionate about during her life, including nurse safety, community health initiatives, and support for families of missing persons. These organizations sought to create systemic change, ensuring that other vulnerable individuals could receive protection, attention, and advocacy that Lauren herself had exemplified through her compassion and dedication as a nurse. Her story also had a profound effect on the local community. Pennsylvania, once shaken by the trauma of her disappearance, gradually transformed that shock into tangible reforms. Law enforcement agencies reevaluated cold case procedures, improving documentation, evidence storage, and interdepartmental communication. Local hospitals and healthcare institutions examined safety protocols for staff, drawing lessons from the vulnerabilities exposed by Lauren's murder. Community leaders organized awareness campaigns and public forums to educate residents on prevention, reporting suspicious activity, and supporting grieving families. Lauren's name became a rallying point for resilience, a reminder that tragedy could be transformed into constructive action that benefited others. For her family and close friends, the emotional journey was far from over. While the arrest and subsequent trial provided legal closure, it did not erase the emotional scars left by decades of uncertainty. Birthdays, anniversaries, and daily routines remained colored by the absence of Lauren's presence. Yet the knowledge that her case had inspired tangible improvements and that her killer had been held accountable offered a sense of solace and validation. Family members spoke publicly about the importance of perseverance, urging others to advocate for justice even in the face of long delays and procedural challenges. Their advocacy highlighted the emotional complexity of cold case resolution. Grief and closure could coexist, even as the memory of loss remained vivid and personal. Beyond her immediate circle, Lauren's story became emblematic of the broader power of forensic science in solving cold cases. Investigators and legal professionals cited her case as a testament to the advances in DNA technology, database cross-referencing, and modern evidence analysis. The meticulous re-examination of decades-old evidence demonstrated that time, while often seen as an obstacle, could also enable breakthroughs when paired with innovation and persistence. For law enforcement agencies across Pennsylvania and beyond, her case served as a model for how cold cases could be revitalized, showing that even the most challenging investigations might eventually yield results when science, dedication, and community support converged. Media coverage and public discourse further amplified Lauren's legacy. Documentaries, news specials, and feature articles recounted the case in detail, emphasizing both the tragedy of her death and the eventual triumph of justice. These narratives ensured that Lauren's story remained part of the public consciousness, educating viewers and readers about the realities of violent crime, the challenges of cold case investigations, and the importance of forensic science in modern law enforcement. Her name became synonymous with resilience, a symbol that even in the darkest moments, persistence, technology, and advocacy could illuminate the path toward justice. The community also grappled with the emotional lessons of the case. Residents reflected on the decades of uncertainty, recognizing how fear and suspicion had permeated daily life. Families who had long avoided certain areas, hesitant to walk alone after dark or wary of strangers, began to reclaim a sense of security, bolstered by the reforms inspired by Lauren's case. Conversations about safety, vigilance, and support for missing persons became normalized, shifting from whispers of fear to discussions of prevention and action. In this way, the impact of Lauren's life and death extended far beyond her immediate family, touching the daily lives of countless individuals who had once lived in the shadow of unresolved crime. The emotional and societal legacy of Lauren McAllister's case also underscored the fragility of life and the importance of valuing every moment. Her colleagues spoke of her dedication and warmth, emphasizing that her contributions extended beyond her professional role. Friends recounted her laughter, generosity, and quiet acts of kindness, reminders of the human cost behind crime statistics. Her story became a lens through which the community could understand the broader implications of violence, loss, and resilience, highlighting the ways in which one life, when remembered and honored, could catalyze transformation. Moreover, Lauren's case prompted reflection on the many unresolved crimes that lingered in Pennsylvania and nationwide. It raised an unspoken question: how many other victims remained without justice, and how many families continued to live with unanswered questions? Her story became a beacon for those seeking resolution, demonstrating that while time could obscure evidence and silence witnesses, advancements in science and unwavering dedication could reopen doors that once seemed permanently closed. For families of missing persons, her case offered hope, a proof that persistence and advocacy might one day bring clarity, accountability, and closure. Ultimately, Lauren McAllister's story evolved from tragedy into a narrative of transformation. Her life, violently interrupted, became a catalyst for change, prompting systemic improvements in forensic investigation, public safety, and community awareness. Her memory became a symbol of perseverance, compassion, and the enduring power of justice. While her family and community would always bear the emotional imprint of her absence, the impact of her story reached far beyond grief. It demonstrated that even in the aftermath of violence, a legacy of hope, education, and systemic reform could emerge, ensuring that her life and the lessons learned from her death would not be forgotten. As Pennsylvania reflects on the case, one critical question lingers, echoing in the halls of law enforcement offices. community centers, and family homes. How many other cases, long forgotten or left unresolved, might find closure through the lessons learned from Lauren McAllister's journey? Her story, while rooted in loss, has become a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of innovation, and the enduring human drive for justice. The legacy she leaves behind is not merely one of sorrow, but of transformation, education, and hope, an enduring reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, a single life can inspire change that reaches far beyond itself. The resolution of Lauren McAllister's 1995 Pennsylvania cold case is more than a closing of a chapter. It is a testament to the enduring power of persistence, the evolution of forensic science, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. For decades, her family lived with the uncertainty and anguish that accompany an unresolved tragedy. Every unanswered question, every anniversary marked by absence amplified the weight of grief. Yet through it all, investigators remained committed, quietly revisiting evidence, re-interviewing witnesses, and embracing new technologies that would one day unlock the truth. The eventual arrest and conviction were not merely legal milestones. They represented validation for years of tireless effort, a confirmation that even the most daunting cold cases can yield answers. Lauren's story extends far beyond courtroom proceedings. Her life and tragic death catalyzed meaningful reforms. Hospitals reviewed safety protocols for staff, law enforcement agencies improved cold case investigations, and community awareness regarding missing persons reached new levels. Foundations in her name now advocate for nurse safety, support for families of victims, and education about the power of forensic science. In this way, Lauren's memory inspires action, ensuring that her influence continues to ripple through her community and beyond. Though her absence remains deeply felt by family, friends, and the town that cherished her, the triumph of justice provides a lasting beacon of hope. Lauren McAllister's story reminds us that no matter how much time passes, relentless dedication, science, and compassion can illuminate the darkest mysteries. Her life and the resolution of her case serve as enduring lessons in resilience, advocacy, and the pursuit of truth. Today, her story calls on all of us to remember the lost, honor their lives, and fight for justice with unwavering resolve.